So we will get started. Like I said, Mike Vaccaro is going to be jumping on in a few minutes. Jack, our intrepid TA, is here with us as well. So want to get the ball rolling. Tim and Justin, you guys are familiar with the show here, so we'll just do what we normally do and kind of go around and get some questions, get some answers, get some conversations going here. But first, let's start with Justin. You give a quick introduction on your kind of Bonaventure connection and what you do now.
Well, it feels like it's been forever since I graduated, and it turns out it has been. So, class of '97, I learned everything I know from Professor Moritz. No, I was fortunate to be there back in the mid '90s and parlayed that into spending quality time at WPIG right there on the other side of campus, which is very exciting. And then jumped here to ESPN in '98. In fact, tomorrow is my 25th anniversary with ESPN.
Where's the gold watch?
Yeah,
Congratulations.
I got lost in the mail apparently.
Congratulations.
LaPlaca's got 4 of them at this point, so I make jokes at his expense that I'm being around. But it's actually it's the Bonaventure connection that got me here. It's LaPlaca's fault. I ran into him my freshman year and stayed in touch with him. And as you always say in this industry, it's all about the relationships. It's who you meet and how you let that relationship grow and build. And my benefit, it's worked out for a nice quarter of a century. So here I am. I'm responsible now. I started as a part-time overnight board op at the radio network and parlayed that into overseeing our radio stations in Chicago and New York. And now I'm back in beautiful bucolic Bristol. I've been here for about 6 years again. So here we are, and it just keeps going one step after another. And I got to spend quality time with Tim last week. Was that last week? I can't remember. 2 weeks ago.
Couple weeks ago. Yeah. Couple weeks ago.
So that's
All
my
right,
just gonna go with you, Tim.
Yeah, we'll keep going down the line here. And Tim, you're up.
Yeah, I cover the NBA for ESPN. Like Justin said, got to see him at the trade deadline day up in Bristol for that. I live in New York, bounce around the Eastern Conference in the league, cover what's going on. Just got back from Salt Lake City for the All-Star game. And yeah, I mean, my situation is very similar to Justin's. I got started because of that, helping me get to the Post out of college, doing agate pages, worked my way up from there. Covered the Nets for 3 years, then went to the Washington Post, covered the league for 3 years, and then came to ESPN 4.5 years ago, and hopefully I'll be here for a while. Knock on wood. So that's my deal.
All right. And finally joining us from New Jersey, Mike Vaccaro. First of all, you can see Vac and Tim and me and Jack and probably Justin too, glancing over at our second screens as we watch Bonna Davidson in the first half. So that's just part of it. Vac, you were just kind of going a career path. So when you were at Bonna's and kind of where you got to where you are now.
Well, I didn't get any help from any of these guys, so I didn't from anybody. No, that's not true. I mean, obviously LaPlaca is everybody's kind of godfather here, and he helped me. And so, too many numerous Bonaventure people to count in terms of counsel and advice, and just kind of showing me the way. We just celebrated the career of a guy named Bob McCarthy. He graduated from the Buffalo News after 39 years, but he retired after 39 years. And, his is one of the, foundational careers in the history of the journalism school. And just so many guys like that whose careers kind of served as beacons for, those of us who came after. That's kind of the way it is. I mean, I don't know that any of my Bonaventure connections has ever gotten me a job, but I know they've helped, give me a career because they've given me the foundational stuff. Whether it's in terms of ethical behavior, whether it's in terms of how to report a story, how to write a story, and so for that I'm grateful. It's a good network to be a part of. I'll put it that way, because there are a lot of not only a lot of bold-faced names, but a lot of bold-faced names who believe in paying it forward. So take advantage of that at every turn.
So so the students joining us here are in their first or second terms in the grad program. So this is their kind of introduction to grad school, introduction to sports media at the graduate level. So Michael, Shante, and Gideon, if you guys have questions, you can just raise your hand. You can use the little raise hand thingy. Just speak up is fine. Just frantically wave your arms, whatever works for getting attention. But to start off, before we get to you guys, I was wondering if Justin, Tim, and Mike, if you guys could kind of talk through. Bless you, Michael. What a day. I know that we will always say that there's no such thing as an average day in this business, and it's absolutely true. But what does a day in your job look like? It can be a recent day, it can be as close to a typical day as you want. But you have careers in sports media. These students want to get into it. So what does it really look like? What's a day or a couple days really like for you? And whoever wants to start off can go.
Well, I mean, I'm sure Tim had a pretty similar experience, but my day started, I guess, last Tuesday, Tim. You know the day better than I would. The days kind of blend together, but waking up to a text that was delivered by my boss about 2:30 in the morning that, whenever you get around to waking up, could you please write a Kevin Durant column because he just got traded. And that blocked out the time between 9 and 11. And I still had a Knicks column to deliver that day also. So in between a couple of rounds of physical therapy and so forth. So so that was not an atypical day, not a typical one, but that's that's the way it happens, right? News breaks and you respond to it. That's my end of it. I mean, in Tim's case, I know he's the one helping to break those stories, which is a whole different cycle unto itself. But it's all the constant whirl of what we do. And so that was kind of a so I wrote 2 basketball stories that day, and the next day I believe I wrote a Giants column. So in my particular situation, because I write about all the sports and all the teams in New York, I mean, you can never really tell day to day what you're going to be writing about.
And before we get everyone else, first of all, Isaiah Blakely from The Ringer, glad you could join us as well. We're very happy to have you here. Back when you say when you wrote a column or an article, about how long is it, and how much time do you have or do you take to write that?
Well, it's usually between 650 and 750 words, more usually between 700 and 750 words. Depends. I mean, I had all morning to write the Durant column because by that point it had already happened. We kind of wanted it before noon, so that was my deadline. Later on at night, I was doing the Knicks game or doing the Knicks column. I wasn't actually off the game, and so I was writing about it. I have until about 7:30 or 7:45 to finish that. So I really had the whole afternoon to. If I were covering a live event, say the game starts 7:30, then I have to write early column to be done before the game ever ends. Then a running column to be written, sometimes depending on when the game ends, right after the game ends, and then a write through. We still have the archaic newspaper deadline, so we still worry about things like early columns and running columns. But, so during the course of writing a routine Knicks game, if the Knicks game goes to overtime, a lot of times I can't do one and done for second edition, so I'll be doing an early or a running and a write through. And the write through's got to be in by about 12:30 p.m. a.m.
All right, Tim, what's a day look like for you, or a recent day look like for you? You were just covering the trade deadline, so what was that like?
I'm not really going to go through that because that's not a normal day for most people. But
Okay.
I mean, if I'm covering a game, I'll go to shoot around in the morning, probably around 10. Go interview players at that. Probably have to do TV 2 or 3 times during the afternoon. Probably like noon, 2 and 3. Then pregame stuff starts around 5:30, 5:45 to 7:30 game. Coach is talking 5:45 and 6. Games at 7:30. Usually I have to do some TV if it's a big game in the 6 o'clock hour for Sports Center. Watch the game, go to the locker room, interview people, write about it, and then do some TV after that, usually for the following morning. So on a day where there's a big game and I'm on the road, I usually be at the arena from like noon until midnight. And then we'll do it again the next day. That's pretty much the nature of my job. I'm at whatever the best game in the Northeast is every day. So just kind of bounce around and go from game to game and go from there.
Gideon, I'll get to your question in a second. It's a good one in the chat. But Justin, what's your work life look like?
And those guys have the fun jobs. I get all the managerial stuff, which, the reason I got into the industry was because I love being a part of the news when it was happening. But now it's all shifted. Like for me, it's get up at 5, walk the dog while I'm on a Zoom call. And that's very exciting. Nothing like listening to whatever the morning guys are going to talk about while trying to avoid coyotes in the outside in the streets or somewhere. But no, seriously, I walk around with a bat, which is always entertaining. And then it leads into get into the office and start dealing with the rest of our shows through the course of the day. Like, for example, today it was listening sessions where we'll grab clips from a show that just took place either that day or previous days, take a listen to them, try to make them better. Conversations and calls with agents talking about potential hosts to do different shows, building out specials for the NCAA tournament, that sort of stuff. Well, this year I'm not really interested because for some reason there's a school that's not going to be involved in it. So but to me, it's just meeting after meeting after meeting, and it's lots of, and try to listen to shows and then have conversations with things that actually make a difference down the road, which certainly takes me away from my days of being in the chair and producing. And that was the greatest because, Tim gets to go to games. He gets to be a celebrity at all times. He's got people flocking around him that cart him around from space to space. And, Vac, when he goes, he's on I heard it's this red carpet that he just rides in on, and they fed him everywhere he goes.
Also, I need to call Bontemp Mr. Bontemp when I see him now. So that's part of his contract. So it's a little.
That's definitely
You
not
was
true.
You guys got to be
That's-
like that.
Are you allowed to make eye contact with him? Because I was told that wasn't an option anymore.
I am because like you said, I got him his first job, but I'm the
No, I said it for a roast
Isaiah,
today. It's news to me.
Isaiah, first of all, can you just before you joined in, we were talking about kind of career path. So if you want to jump in and kind of talk about how you got to the Ringer, and then kind of what your day-to-day looks like in your job.
Yeah, so how I got to the Ringer. So going into my senior year, I applied for a scholarship or through an internship through the National Association of Black Journalists. They had linked up with the Ringer for the first time, and I was fortunate enough to get that internship. And so I worked out in LA for about 3 months, and then went back to school. Did most of that year, get sent home in March. And then I hadn't had any contact with them all year. And then probably late April, I get an email out of the blue, and they're like, we're just checking in, seeing if you had any plans. I go, wow, perfect. I have nothing going, so this is great. And so I started like June 1 as kind of a production assistant and on their audio team. And the first few months were just me kind of learning how to edit podcasts and Pro Tools, because I knew how to edit a little bit, but not in Pro Tools. And so, yeah, that was my first few months, and then it's just kind of gone from there. I think it's 2.5 years now. And yeah, so my day-to-day, my schedule is like a little bit different right now, but normally it's, I don't have a ton of meetings. A lot of it is any planning we do is like usually in Slack or texting. We meet if we have more logistic things to handle, but we try not to. And then if I have a podcast that day, we record on a Zoom. They send me their audio because they have their own equipment at home. They send it to me, and then I edit it and either publish it as soon as possible or overnight. But usually most of the pods are like daily, so try to get those out as soon as possible. But yeah, that's kind of my day-to-day usually.
All right. So we got some questions in the chat, so I'll take these and try to broaden them out a little bit. So Gideon's first question was, how many articles do you need to write per week? And we'll broaden that out for the audio guys as well. So just kind of like in terms of articles, podcasts that you're working on, audio that you're overseeing, like how much, what's a workload week like? And I know it varies on news events happening. Kevin Durant gets traded overnight, that adds to your workload. But on general, what's a column load? Tim, what's a story load? And Justin and Isaiah, what's kind of like how many podcasts or shows are you overseeing or working on? Especially Justin, when you were producing. I know.
Yeah, I'm contracted to do 4 columns a week, although that generally, is very fluid. you know, if one of our teams in the playoffs, then I'm writing pretty much every day. Sometimes I write 2 a day. You know, I think post-pandemic, we've reached a point where whatever taboos are in place that you were expressly forbidden from writing about games you covered, not writing about games you weren't at, has been broken. So you know, if something happens, if I'm not working and I see that Julius Randle is about to score 50 points in Memphis or something, there was a time when you wouldn't even think about writing it because you're not there. That's kind of not the way really the rules are, at least not around here. But it's generally 4 weeks, and sometimes, like I said, sometimes more, sometimes very unfrequently less. Usually, the beauty about New York City is that there's always something happening, and there's always a team playing, and there's always some manager who needs to get fired, or some player who needs to get traded, or or whatever. So it's actually I actually don't like the weeks where I'm strictly scheduled because I know better. It's the old joke about tell God your plans. And that's kind of the same thing when you're dealing with the news. Certainly as a columnist, you really just don't know what's going to happen. And so I do have battles with my editor sometimes saying, just keep me open for like 5 days of the week. I mean, you're going to get your columns because shit's going to happen. It always does. And when it does, nobody's better at putting the shit into 750 words than I am.
So Mac, wasn't there was it Santana's no-hitter that you drove to in like the 7th inning?
Well, that had actually been a running joke for a lot of years because
I was going to say that's a long-standing thing in New York.
Yeah, I mean,
Mike was trying to get to a no-hitter for about 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, probably thousands of baseball games I've covered. I've never seen a no-hitter, and obviously I've still never seen one from its beginning. But so it kind of become kind of its own thing where and I've been living in my house since 2003 or 2004, so I've got it timed perfectly where I can leave my house after the bottom of the 5th inning to get to Yankee Stadium, after the top of the 5th inning to get to Citi Field. And so I've done that trip a dozen times before, or I actually left a playoff basketball game once because somebody was pitching a perfect game at Yankee Stadium, so you know where the post priorities are. And then, of course, I had to find my way back in. As I was halfway there, somebody got a base hit, and now I had no column at all because I wasn't at the basketball game anymore. And that was a lot of fun. Good luck finding parking after that. But yeah, the Santana game was unique because he had like 90 pitches after 5 innings, so it was unlikely he was even going to be allowed to throw the no-hitter. But you do what you do. It was a Friday night. I wasn't doing anything else, so I got in my car. And it was actually, I hit every break. Usually you hit traffic or you hit something, the game starts to speed along, and all of a sudden you wonder if you're going to get there. And there was no traffic. There was, the left fielder for the Mets, Mike Baxter, messed up his shoulder trying to preserve the no-hitter. So that was like 20 minutes that I had extra to get there. So I actually got there for the top of the 8th inning. So I saw the 8th inning, and then I saw the 9th inning, and so I was able to write the column. But I mean, I'd like to think that I would still do that now, but like I said, the taboos have all been shattered, and it's not like you're not going to have access to Santana on the post-game, TV broadcast. I mean, I'd like to think that I'm still professional enough to where I want to get in the car and do it and be there. I won't sign a statement to that though, because it's kind of the way of the world now. Unfortunately, those taboos no longer exist. But if I had done it that way that night, I would have one less story to tell. And it's a fun story, and it was kind of funny. Like Tim mentioned, I mean, it had become a thing. Vac's going to try and make a no-hitter, so it's kind of like on Christmas Eve you get you get these people tracking Santa's sleigh. It was kind of the same thing on the Grand Central Parkway, getting to it. Mike Harrington from the Buffalo News especially used to love that meme. So he was like checking in, where are you now? Where are you now? So yeah, I mean, that added a little element. And that's something that you wouldn't get if you just wrote it from your lazy boy.
Tim, how about how many games you covering in a week?
It depends. Some weeks it sort of just depends on who's around, right? Some weeks it's 5 or 6. Some weeks it's 2 or 3. During the regular season, I might go a few days or a week without writing anything. I might write every day. It really is just kind of fluid and depends on what's going on. And then obviously in the playoffs, I'm usually working and writing every day for 2.5 months. So through, and then it's really 3 months because it goes all the way sort of till from like mid-April till mid-July for the end of summer league. So but yeah, it when I was at a newspaper, like when I was at the Washington Post, sort of like that, I was writing basically Monday through Friday and then a Sunday column for half the year for the paper because you needed stuff for the print edition of the paper. But with us being a website, things are a lot more fluid than that. So it really just depends on when there's a need for me to do stuff.
I have one question, please. Do journalists need to travel every week to cover the games to write?
You muted.
That's a great question because the answer that I want to tell you is yes. That's the goal. I mean, I guess. I mean, and not every week. I mean, look. If you're a beat writer, yes. If you're a beat writer, you're going to cover, 41 Knicks games on the road. You're going to cover, 9 Jets games on the road. You're going to cover 81 Yankees games on the road. That's a yes. If you're a columnist or a sidebar guy, you're going to go for the big games, and that'll involve a lot of travel. But as I said, I mean, more and more, we're not the only paper that does this now. I know. I mean, if we can save some money on the third sidebar guy going to a Giants Eagles game, you're going to do that and have that guy covered off TV. I mean, we're lucky because the Post still believes in traveling us, but I won't get into my circumstances. My circumstances prevent me from traveling for a couple of months, but they still want me to write off important things that happen on the road. And so, like I said, I mean, as a result of the kind of the post-COVID new rules, you certainly can do it. But I mean, what I will say is that you can't do nearly as good a job doing it off television, doing it from your living room as you can being in the arena, in the locker room, on the floor, seeing things up close, talking to people, asking your own questions.
Right.
There's a real difference between what you can do and what you should do. I mean,
Right.
And that's and then the difference, really is just in the quality of the work.
Right. Thank you.
So, Beck, you brought up that point too, and we were talking about. Unfortunately, now you can kind of do the new rules where you don't have to rush to the stadium. And Justin, I'd love to get your kind of perspective on this from the audio perspective and kind of from your perspectives on this. Why is that? You said you can do a better job at the stadium, and from all of your perspectives, why is that? Why, we're all watching a game on TV right now that we could write a 500-word game story off of, very easily. Why would it be better if we were there, aside from the fact that it's North Carolina and definitely warmer than Rochester? But why is it so important to be better? Why is it better to be there than writing off your TV?
Because you can't absorb an atmosphere looking at something you can't experience truthfully. Like I literally just saw it earlier today. 3 years ago today, I was in Vegas at Fury Wilder. And that was one of the greatest events that I can remember. I mean, nothing better than Conor McGregor the first time at Madison Square Garden. That was insane. I've never been in an event like that. And I'm a radio guy, man. I'm supposed to be able to absorb it with my eyes closed and kind of feel it that way. But there's nothing like the energy that comes out of an arena, out of a stadium. And it's not true. Like when I'm reading a column or I'm listening to one of our hosts describe an event, if they're not there, I can tell. And there are hosts that I have or have had that will tell me, oh yeah, I got the real sense from it watching on my TV. No, you didn't. You absolutely did not. When I was at the Super Bowl in New York, sitting there watching Peyton Manning have the ball snapped over his head, it was a very different feel than anybody that was actually just watching it on television. That being said, it's completely opposite of my philosophy around the Super Bowl, which I want us to be there for the week leading up to, but then you better be home watching the game on TV because 99.9% or whatever the percentage is of people that are actually listening to us the next morning watch it on TV. So you have to have the same experience, but most of the time it's about the atmosphere. If you can't be there, then how can you give a true representation of what it actually felt like?
I was in the building when Larry Johnson hit his 4-point play for the Knicks, which is probably before most of you guys were born. I was in the building when Scott Brocious hit a home run in the 9th inning of a World Series game the day after Tino Martinez had done that. And I don't know that in the columns. My next day, I tried to put words to what the sound felt like, but whatever I did write, I know was informed by what I felt hearing that those buildings explode. And I think that's that speaks to a little bit about what Justin is saying. And also, I'll add that, look, I mean, the fact of the matter is I'm old, so I've been doing this a long time. I got 35 years in. I think part of why people read me now is because they want to hear what I have to say about the game I watch, as opposed to what players telling me they say, because there are other places they can read what the players say. So I don't need quotes, but I still like quotes, because I think that getting my own quotes, getting my own perspective, interviewing the player, asking the question myself, gets the kind of stuff that will help inform my column in a way that still speaks to my voice. So, I mean, look, from that standpoint, have I been able to get away with doing my job the last couple of months, not being there? I have. That's entirely a result of being in the business for 35 years, knowing I can call people on the phone if I have to. That's not something that most people have the privilege to do. It's a matter of length, time, and doing the job a long time. And the way you get to that point is the way I did it the first 33 years of my career, which is, I'm at the arena, as opposed to a lot of things I could have been doing, other things I could have been doing in my life, which is a choice I made. But it also allowed me to be able to kind of get a feel for how I wanted to do the job. And that's why I miss doing that job now. I'm kind of getting back into it now, doing it the way I used to do it, but that's what I've missed the last couple of months.
Dante, go for it.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Isaiah.
Oh, Tim.
I'm curious. No, I want to hear what Isaiah has to say about that from his perspective in terms of having people at stuff.
This is like a harder question for me because we don't travel very often to games. I think the first game I did professionally for work was the Super Bowl just a couple weeks ago. And so I think the biggest thing I'd say is, like the emotion and what you feel like it was already mentioned, and also body language, and momentum swings, like the things you don't see during commercial break. You stare at the sideline, or like at an NBA game, if you're close enough, you can literally hear what players are saying. Things like that, I think, are important. And I do agree. I think it's noticeable when people are just pretending like they were there and they were not. I think that's almost always noticeable. And so, yeah, I think we don't travel very often, and a lot of our hosts don't want to travel anymore to games and stuff, from what I've noticed. And we're less of we're so big picture a lot of the time, so I don't think it's as necessary for us. We're not all a lot of our stuff is people watching tape once the All-22 comes out or something like that, and so it's not quite as necessary for us. So I get why we don't travel too often.
All right, Tim, you got anything on this one?
Yeah, I think it's sort of, I wanted to hear Isaiah's perspective on it because like he said, the way the Ringer does stuff is just a lot different. And I think, it's sort of emblematic just in general of the different ways you can go about doing stuff. Like Vac said, he can write columns from home in a way that most other people can't, because people aren't picking up the post to read what he has to say. If you're trying to cover a team on a daily basis, you can't do it from home and not be around the team at all. Whereas, for Isaiah's editing, a Kevin Clark pod or something, Kevin's doing a lot of big picture stuff from around the NFL. He could do that from home and talk to people, and people are coming there for his perspective as opposed to what happened at the game. For somebody like me, whose job is to be at games, if I'm not at games, my work suffers pretty dramatically if I can't talk to Joel Embiid and Jason Tatum and the elite players on these teams and see what's going on and feel what's going on and being at the games and providing perspective from being there and talking to people. So, to go back to your original question, there's not, I think, one way to do it at this point. It's part of the positives in the way the business has changed, but it's hard, and Kevin is a good example. He's a guy who spent years on a beat before he started doing this stuff. You have to start out with a foundation of being around people and being around the sport you're covering before you can take a step back from that standpoint, because you need to have the baseline of experience and knowledge of being around it to then be able to really tell what's going on.
All right, Shante, you've been waiting patiently, so you're up.
This is, I guess, for anyone that wants to answer it, but just piggybacking off of what we're talking about now, have there ever been any memorable moments of unspoken events that have happened or unspoken things that have happened that you just had to be there to experience? You know, where if you weren't there, you couldn't obviously hear it if it's unspoken, or you couldn't see it, but it's just the fact that you were present and it just, you know, was just that important and that impactful. If there's any memories that you could share.
You know, one of the saddest things about the way that the way of the world now in the NBA is that they've moved us from courtside to, you know, if we're lucky, maybe halfway up, and if we're not lucky, all the way up. Very few. I mean, Tim can speak better than I can. If there's any, I know Oklahoma City was our last holdout. There were some places where you still sit courtside, but I can just tell you that when I first started,
Memphis, Oklahoma City, and Dallas are still
Right.
like that.
Okay, so I mean that, you know, and that's good. You know, when I first started covering the Knicks a lot, our seats were literally behind the Knicks bench. They of course now sell those for, you know, $10,000 a seat, but in those days they still believe in the value of a well-written story, well-written column as a matter of marketing the team. So, and the best parts about that were, you know, I mean, I give you 10 examples just from that, but there was one playoff series in 1999. The Knicks were about ready to close out the Hawks in a 4-game sweep, and Jeff Van Gundy had just been in the news because they almost replaced him with Phil Jackson, and then he was clearly going to have to give him an extension. And the crowd starts just yelling, starts chanting, Jeff Van Gundy. You know, Jeff Van Gundy, we all know him now as his famous broadcaster. At the time, he was still kind of a schlubby coach who felt like he was like filling in, you know, wearing his daddy's clothes, kind of on the sidelines. So it was kind of an amazing story. And he just started he started to grab for his Diet Coke, and his hand was shaking. You just tell his hand was shaking. You know, and he just turns to me and ironically, if Adrian Wojnarowski was sitting next to me, and he said, "You believe this shit?" We clean that up for the morning paper, but you know, I mean, you know, that's not something you're going to get in a press conference. It's not something you're going to get. That's just not something you're going to get unless you're there. And sadly, I mean, that kind of thing isn't available. Now, I'm not going to see that or have that interaction from Section 507, which is where they have us now. And so, but that just, I think, emphasizes the fact that stuff like that, where it can happen, still happens in the locker room. In, you know, if you're passed by somebody in the hallway, you know, a lot of times you want to talk to an owner, you know, and you have a relationship with the owner, you'll spot him. You know, he won't necessarily have a press gathering, but if you see him and he sees you, you know, then you can talk to him, you know, because you know, I've done that 100 times with John Mara with the Giants, where it's like, I just see him go over, he knows I'm not going to bring, you know, a crowd of people with me, and I just ask him 2 questions, boom. And that's what I have. And those are the kind of things that you just, you know, those aren't scheduled in the press conferences or press availabilities or anything like that. That's what you really miss if you're not in the arena, in the stadium.
So Isaiah, we'll put you on the spot here, but you were at Radio Row, what was it, 2-3 years ago with WSBU?
Yeah, I graduated, I think 3 years ago. So yeah.
All right. So what were some of so being an undergrad student at Radio Row at Super Bowl week, what's your best story? What's your best moment or from that experience?
I think my favorite experience probably, I don't remember if it was the last time I went with SBU, but I think my favorite one would have been when we got 5 minutes with Deontay Wilder. And it was just like, we had to work really hard for it. And he ended up being like, you never know when, like, he's like kind of known for being a hothead, and he's also a massive human being. You just don't know how those things are going to go. But he was actually super awesome. And so that was cool. Actually, no, the last one I went to, so UFC fighters, when they go to Radio Row, are much more attainable than any other setting because everybody's a football guy and don't really know them. Like Sean O'Malley is a fairly big deal in UFC, and he was just walking around all week, like no one bothering him this year. But Kamaru Usman was at the time, I think he's welterweight. I think I get the weight classes mixed up. But he was the champ at the time, and we had booked him. He was going to be our last interview of the day. and then his rival was also there, Jorge Masvidal. They get in a massive scuffle in the convention center. And I'm like, wow, our interview is definitely cooked. And I ended up finding the PR person. I'm like, are we still good for 4? She's like, yeah, all good. I'm like, that's crazy. See, literally, you fought in here. And then he was super great. Let us hold the belt, like one of my favorite interviews. And then he went on like a crazy win streak, so that went 8 great. So yeah, I would say that was probably, those two are probably my favorite moments for sure.
Come on, Isaiah, admit it. That was staged. I was standing right there.
The crazy thing is I missed it. I don't know how I actually missed it. So honestly, it could have been because it must have been quiet. I somehow missed it.
It was unbelievable. I happened to be standing. That was the first year. It was down in Miami.
Yeah.
And we had finally gotten the massive set I'd always wanted. They built
Yeah.
huge, and it was all right back by us. And I was standing there with Sean O'Hara. And
Okay. Yeah.
next thing I know, he's pulling me to the side because these two go face to face, start screaming at each other. We always talk about relationships. So the head of the UFC from a PR standpoint is Dave Lockett. Dave Lockett used to be the PR guy from the Pittsburgh Steelers, who I got to know while I was producing. And he's like, hey man, just, I need you to stay back over here. And next thing is, these two guys just go flying at each other. I'm like, okay, here we go. That was great. That was a great call.
Yes.
I looked over. I'm like, oh, there's the Bonaventure guys. Yeah, they don't know what's happening.
Yeah, I literally never saw it. I found out through Twitter. It was like, oh, I need to find their PR rep because I don't know if this is still on or not.
Who have one question, please? What is one of the most intense, jaw-dropping, barn burner playoff games you ever covered? One of the most intense, jaw-dropping, like unbelievable game that you will never forget type playoff games that you ever wrote about and discussed about.
This past Super Bowl was a good one. The ending was a little iffy, but this last one was cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was credentialed for this, but I didn't cover out mostly just shadowing my dad, who's also in media. Paul Millsap dropped 50 in the Garden. I think it was like
that's a random poll. Isaiah.
It is, but I was there, and it's one of the highest scoring.
No, it's good job shouting out your old man,
Yeah.
Sherrod, Boston legend.
Yeah.
That's just, I didn't expect you to say Paul Millsap dropping 50.
Yeah, it was just like an incredible playoff game that I was at.
Yeah, it was a good game.
And also him getting locked up by Marcus Smart in the fourth quarter after having 50 all game was like incredible. So that one was a really good one for sure.
That was a fun
So
game.
Isaiah, you got to make sure that your dad knows that you were a masterclass speaker in the program that he's a
I
part of.
texted him. I texted him. I was like, "Wait, what class number are you? Am I actually speaking to your class or no?" Yeah, I did text him about it, so he does know.
Tim Beck, what do you got?
I'll share two, one of which I'm not necessarily proud of, but it just tells you sometimes you can get caught up in the things you cover. The first one was, I referenced earlier in the 2001 World Series, the Yankees were losing 2-1. They tied the series in Game 4 because down 2 runs in the 9th inning, Tino Martinez hits a home run, then Derek Jeter hits a home run to win the game. Then in Game 5, they're again down 2 runs, same pitcher. You know this not going to happen again. So in the old Yankee Stadium, you pretty much had to abandon your computer to go downstairs to the clubhouse because I wanted the clubhouse to get that done. I'd already written my Yankees lose column and sent it to the office. And so I'm just getting to the door, and all I could hear was, I thought, mind you, this is, a month after 9/11, and all I could hear was just heart-stopping rattle, rumble. It felt like an earthquake had hit the Bronx. And I get there just in time to look at the TV and see that, on tape, 7-second tape later, Scott Brooks hit a home run, tied the game. And I'm sitting there with the Yankees lose column. So I gotta find someone's cell phone, one of those neat old flip phones and whatnot, just to try and get to the office. This cannot run. You cannot run that column. Can't lose yet. And so, then I had to hurry back up to press box. And so that I blew that edition because of that. But, the one I'm not necessarily, I don't necessarily want on my tombstone, but again, we're human. And again, this is something that would never have happened if the seats were still courtside, because even big moments, you learn how to kind of watch games like a eunuch, right? But during Linsanity 10 years ago, this is probably Game 6 or Game 7, and he's dropping 38, 39 points on Kobe at the Garden.
Oh yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, and by the end, me and Ken Berger from Newsday, basketball column at the time in Newsday, every time he was making this crazy shot or that crazy shot or that crazy pass, we'd like high 10 each other in the press box. I mean, it's the most unprofessional moment of my life. But I didn't care because it was, I mean, it was like a, it was like a, you know, it was out of science moment. And it's funny because Ken's long out of the business, and I probably should have been after that night. But whenever we see each other, we always give each other a high 10, knowing what we did, and you know, kind of our secret, kind of our secret handshake. But well, I think that speaks to your point, which was about, you know, you asked about electrifying moments. I mean, you know, unfortunately, you know, you kind of run the balance of trying to balance how you're supposed to behave with how you want to convey the excitement to somebody. So it's like, you know, I remember, you know, I don't mean to hog this discussion, but you know, when I was at the Giants Patriots Super Bowl with the helmet catch, you know, I mean, which was the most absurd thing I've ever seen in sports. And, you know, we're all just like wandering the press box like lions, like trying to find one replay, this replay. Did that just happen? That just happened? Holy shit, holy shit. And, you know, but you can't view it the way that the people you're writing for view it. I mean, it's not this amazing, you know, like lifetime achievement moment. It's like, oh my God, how am I going to convey the importance of this ridiculous moment, you know, in a paragraph, you know, in a cogent paragraph in the morning. So that's kind of, it's kind of the challenge, but it's also a large part of the fun.
Tim, you got one for us?
Yeah, I mean, I've been at most of the relevant games the past 8 or 10 years in the NBA. I was at that Lakers game with Vac during Linsanity. I was at the first game of Linsanity when they played the Nets on Super Bowl Saturday, the night before the Super Bowl when that started. I was at the Tim Duncan's last game in 2016. I covered all the Thunder Warriors 2016. So I was at game 6 when Clay had the crazy fourth quarter to win. I covered Warriors Cavs all 4 times actually, but I was at all those games in 2016. Covered the last several finals. So I've seen all those pivotal games those years. You know, probably if there was one particular one, game 6 in OKC in 2016, pretty hostile atmosphere. When Kevin went back there the next year, it was a pretty hostile atmosphere in a regular season when he was with the Warriors at that point. You know, but yeah, I mean, those are the fun days of the job when you're there deep in the playoffs. You know, obviously it was at game 6 and 7 this past year with Miami and Boston. Which were a couple of great games. Celtics, Warriors obviously had some really great games in it. Steph had a couple legendary games in that series. You know, but you go through a lot of games in the regular season, you know, on random days in February and March and January when, you know, you're seeing kind of nondescript games so that you're there in May and June for the games that really matter. And, you know, I've been very fortunate that I've had a chance to see a lot of them over the years.
Tim, nothing from the 04-05 Bonaventure men's basketball season?
I saw our one home win against Rhode Island with Jimmy Barron. I saw that. I remember that. That's for sure. I saw a lot of losses.
That was 50% of the wins that year. That's not bad.
I know. Beat them at Austin P.
Michael had a question from a while ago that's been very patiently waiting for an answer for it. Since we have about 10-15 minutes left, it's a good time to get to it. We'll go around the horn on this one. Whoever wants to go first. We'll let Justin go first on this one. What are the best networking tips you guys can give for this industry?
Meet anyone, everyone, every chance you get, and then follow up with them. There's nothing more important than meeting as many people as humanly possible. If they give you their cell number, text them, follow up. But most importantly, hit them in the time that isn't the busiest. Because if you're reaching out just to say, hey, you got a job, chances are I don't. But if you build a relationship down the line, it's going to help. I mean, it's a small little thing, but Isaiah and I met the first time at the Super Bowl. And then we literally just did a project together about 3 weeks ago. Who would have known? That stuff comes together. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty damn cool. I love that kind of stuff. But the most important thing on networking is just be yourself too. Don't try to go up and say, well, I've done this, I've done that. Nobody cares about that. They care about you as a human and as a person, because that's going to connect you later on down the way. And it's the same thing I tell everybody. It's just be genuine, be real, and don't reach out when you need something, reach out when you actually care about something. Makes a huge difference. By the way, my moment was 2000 at the Sugar Bowl when I was standing on the sidelines talking to Mike. I was actually with Michelle Tafoya, and she warned me that the ball was about to come our direction. Next thing I know, there's a hand on my shoulder pulling me away as Michael Vick comes flying by after almost completely knocking me on my face. Yeah, I made it through that one. And I do believe it's sounding to me like Linsanity had the biggest collection of all Bonaventure people, because I was at all those games as well. So it's a good thing for all of us. We must have been the good luck at that point, but
Right.
Yeah.
So Justin, just to follow up real quick, when you say when you say follow up with somebody, send them a text, keep that relationship going. What does that text say? What does that email say? Because it's that, follow up is one of those things that sounds easy to do, but like, what's a good follow up that you would get from somebody, and what's a non-good follow up that you would get from someone?
well, someone doing their homework and say, okay, so let's see, and just to personalize it. So I know Justin's on the radio side at ESPN. I happen to turn on, because I'm interested and that's a field I want to get into, I would turn on the show one day and be like, hey, you know what? I saw Keyshawn, Jay, Will, and Max, and they were talking about this. That's an interesting topic. How'd you guys go about learning about or taking it in that angle? Why did you have the dialogue about, Eric Bieniemy this morning when you could have gone Aaron Rodgers sitting in the world of darkness? Something like that actually shows that you're paying attention will then stay in my brain a little bit longer the next time you come a call. Now, to me, that's a great way to go. The worst thing to do is say, hey, man, just wanted to say hi. Got any jobs? No, I don't. And you'd be shocked the number of people that actually do that. You run into them in different places. Yeah, well, so what's going on? And by the way, if anyone happens to know how to read and you take a look at what's happening on our company and all of the tech world, media world right now, probably not a good question to ask. Got any jobs? Just saying.
I mean, to me, following on that, I mean, it seems really simple, but don't be bashful. I mean, don't be shy. It amuses me, but also it saddens me that there are so many times like friends will say, hey, my son wants to get into sports broadcasting. Can you talk to him? I said, of course, have him reach out to me. They say, what, can you call him? He's a little, and I say, no, not going to do it. If he wants to talk to me, he's got to, what do we do for a living? At the root of our jobs, what do? We talk to strangers for a living, right? So if you're not going to call this stranger and I'm going to return your call, and I'm going to talk to you, then, I can't help you. I mean, I got two examples on this, just on this train, both, Tim Bontemp and Jack Milko took the initiative to reach out to me. I wouldn't, I like to think I'm involved in my alma mater, but I would have known Tim Bontemp from, from a hole in the wall. But his third hour on campus, he was asking around, who should I get a hold of? And the professors there were nice enough to give him my name, and he was smart enough to reach out to me. And you don't think it impressed me that in late August of 2002 or whatever it was, I'm getting a call from a freshman that has his crap together enough to know enough that it's probably a smart thing to build a relationship with me. I'm not saying that's the reason he got the job at the Post 5 years later, 4 years later, but I mean, it certainly didn't hurt. And Jack's another guy who, when he was interested in the Bonaventure program, through a mutual friend, he reached out to me, smart, I mean, and I'm not saying that I have all the answers. I'm not saying I can get you, just like Judge, I probably can't get you a job. I mean, the thing about Tim is that, it's funny, I actually did help get him a job, but that's very rare. But I like to think I've been able to, I do have enough assembled wisdom or experience over the last 30 years. And if someone wants to talk to me, I'm going to dispense every ounce of it, and whether it's helpful or not helpful, that's what we do. We talked about the network earlier. That's what that is here. But what sometimes infuriates me is how few people actually take advantage of. Oh, I happen to know, I mean, my email's at the bottom of every one of my columns. Anybody wants to reach out to me when they want to tell me I'm a jerk because of how I wrote about the Knicks, or because they want to, learn how to be a sports writer, it's available, and so it's not like it's, none of us is in witness protection. So we're all out there, and I think this, this little Zoom call, this little Brady Bunch Zoom call has reinforced the fact that we really want to help. We want to be out there to say, what can we do? This is what you got to do. And like Justin said, we're not magicians. We're not going to just hand over jobs, but we can hand over accumulated wisdom, which is actually, in the big picture, almost as valuable. Is it valuable as a job? Of course not. But if it helps get you that job somewhere on the road, then it's just as helpful and just as useful.
Yeah, I would say for me, the biggest thing I would say in terms of sourcing is I just describe it as like when you got to school and you are trying to make friends, it's really no different. You just have to, it's sort of what both Zach and Justin said. It's a combination of being persistent and not being shy. You'll be surprised how far you'll get if you're just a decent person and are just reach out to people and make a connection with them. People will remember that. I got back from Salt Lake City this morning, and earlier today, in between doing expenses, I was making a list of all the people I saw in Salt Lake last week to just circle back with them that I saw at various events and the games and parties and whatever, just to say like, hey, good seeing you, etc. It's not a big deal, but it's the kind of thing that if you do that over time and you make connections with people, people will circle back with you later. The biggest misnomer about Adrian and what Adrian does is people just think that people are just calling Adrian and telling him what's going on around the NBA. The reason Adrian breaks all the news in the NBA is because he's spent the better part of 20 years building relationships with everybody in the NBA. So he's in constant dialogue with everybody and knows their families and knows who they are and what they're about and what they've got going on and can talk to them about that stuff. So then people want to have a relationship with him and actually connect with him. If he just hits people and says, hey, give me this information, they're not going to do it. And that's, that's the thing I think people need to just keep in mind is, that you only get anywhere, whether it's trying to build a relationship with a player for a story or trying to break news or whatever, through persistence and showing up and being around. And like Justin said, circling back, you just have to keep circling back in all those circumstances. If you do that over time, it'll add up and people will want to work with you on stuff and you'll have the sources you're looking for.
The two most exhausting things you can do to your body is to do an Ironman triathlon and spend about 20 minutes watching Woj on NBA trade deadline day. By end of I know I need to take a nap just watching him work. I'm not sure how much Red Bull he must drink to stay in peak condition during those days.
Only thing I'd add, because all of that is spot on, is also like connect with people in a similar position to you or similar age to you. Just build like knowing a bunch of people who are in a similar stage of the industry to you is like super helpful. And I think rewarding as well, because I think people get caught up in like competing for jobs and whatnot, and it's like it's not really like that, honestly. And so yeah, I would just say connecting with people in your age group or similar positions to you, because it's just people you can go to for advice and things like that. And like growing in the industry with other people is like really cool as well.
That's a really great point that Isaiah makes too. I know for me, like when I started covering the NBA, there's players that I covered my first year that are still in the league. The guys like Brooke Lopez, who I've now known for 10 or 12 years. There's coaches, good friend of mine who now works in the front office for a team, was an assistant with Brooklyn when I started. Another guy, Sean Sweeney, was an assistant with Brooklyn when I started. He's now Jason Kidd's lead assistant. There's other guys that started around the same time as me that are assistant GMs with teams. And like I got to know those guys when they were the very lowest level jobs like me getting started. And then those relationships continue over time. And as they ascend, so have I. And then, now if I call them, I've got a decade's worth of time spent with those guys. And like there's been nobody that's ever been better at sourcing, covering a team on a beat than George King, who covered the Yankees for 20 plus years at the New York Post. And the best, obviously Adrian is the best in terms of, covering a league, and I've learned a ton from him, but I've never learned more about covering a team than I did just following George around Yankee Stadium. And George knew every person that worked in the building, the security guys, the janitors, the clubhouse attendants, and knew everything about them. And he would get tips from the randomest places because he was friends with everybody and everybody knew to reach out to him. And it, like to Isaiah's point, if you just are trying to be friendly with the person in charge or the star player on the team or whatever, that'll get you to a certain point in theory, but you're not going to be able to get as far as you want to go doing that. It's very important to make connections across the board. And like he said, when you're starting out, especially find people that are in the same boat as you, because, you know, down the road, you'll both be advancing at the same rate in the same direction.
Also, a shout out to Tim, and this is kind of just, I think educational also. I mean, Tim can probably list the 4 or 5 guys who were his contemporaries, both at the Post and other newspapers, started out around the same time he did. And it's not a coincidence that he's where he is now, because he knew enough at age 23 to ask, well, who should I model myself at? And, he never really, I think, had any intention of covering Major League Baseball, and nor has he gone on to cover Major League Baseball. But when he was told, the best in the business is George King, guess who he, made a point of shadowing every time he went to Yankee Stadium? George King. And you know what? King noticed that. And, King is a guy who doesn't like anybody, and immediately understood that this is a guy that should be followed. I mean, we have another example of a Rangers writer at the Post, Molly Walker, who came to us right out of our friends at UMass. And, her first, after about a year of GA, she was going to go on the Rangers, and she, called Larry Brooks, who is kind of the George King of hockey, and, said, hey, could you be able to help me? He's like, first thing you need to do before I'll tell you anything else, go home and read the collective bargaining agreement, then call me in a week and we'll talk about it. That's an weird thing to hear, especially at 23. And I'm not sure how many 23-year-olds would have. Like, pretty sure Tim would have. And Molly did. Molly went back and she read it 3 times, back with Forge, and she called Larry Brooks the next week. And not only said I read it, but I have 10 questions. And from that moment on, well, the best part about that is that Larry didn't only help her onto the beat, but now he's got a source book that thick, which suddenly has become her source book. So how do you get good at the job? Well, that's part of it. And a lot of it is just following the better instincts of the better angels of your nature, understanding that if you think this is the right way to approach the job, and usually you err on the side of working really hard, that's the way to do it.
I think that is a flawless note to end on. So Vac and Justin, thanks for putting your contact info in the chat. Tim and Isaiah, if you're cool with doing so, if you could do that, and then everyone can have it, and they'll have it in case they need to get in touch with you. Would it be all right if Jack up there took a screen grab of us so that he can post this on social media and brag about the awesome people? I'll hide my face so nobody seems to see that. But
we can also do this another hour, since there's no reason to watch the body. So I don't going to be.
That's not. That's a rough one. Yeah. So I saw somebody tweeted out it was if you never saw the Solomon era, we just got 20 minutes of it. And I don't think it was that bad, but the Solomon era was, well, I saw the good year of the Solomon era. So
as I say, I saw the best year of the Chapman era, which I did, sadly.
Oof. Anyway, all right. Well, everything is there. So guys, thank you, Justin, Mike, Isaiah, and Tim. Thank you guys for taking the time. Everyone else, good to see you, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
And thank you.
Thank you.